was an interesting sound. We've been recording for about like 2 minutes, 3 minutes now. So that's exciting. So as you can unveil today, we're going to start with location place of Latin America. And while you guys are getting stuff out, I realized that I never actually did assign you all a BBC article for the U.S. and Canada. So that's all right. I'll give you some more next week. But the plan is I'm going to start next week with the maps. So we hopefully will get kind of back on a more regular schedule and move away thusly. So for starters, you can expect the same sort of thing like we did with the U.S. and Canada. We have a bunch of blank maps for you to fill out. In this case, there's only one of them. It includes Mexico, as well as Central America and South America, as well as the islands of the Caribbean. Now, one thing I'm going to tell you right now, and I'm going to tell you a lot so that you all know it, but there's a whole bunch of little teeny tiny islands throughout the eastern portion of the Caribbean. You don't need to actually fill out all those. You can just mark them as the Windward and Leeward Antilles. But anyways, I'll get some more details on that at a later date. For now, let's look at where we're talking about. Generally speaking, when we talk about Latin America, is that my stapler? Yeah. Really, guys, beating on it like that actually makes it lock up and doesn't work as well. The best way is to put steady pressure on it until it clicks. I know that there's always that temptation for stapler just to go pop and make it work. This one doesn't. That actually has the opposite effect on it. It usually breaks it, or rather causes a staple to get stuck in it. Anyways, why do we call it Latin America? Does anyone know? Where Latin comes from. Anybody know? Donuts ate donuts. Romans go to the house. It says Romans go home. Let's what was the language of ancient Rome? Latin. So why are we talking about ancient Rome in this area, which clearly is not Rome? Well, what language do they speak for the most part throughout Latin America? Spanish, right? And it is based on what other language? Hey, it's a Romance language, Romanesque. By the way, do you guys know what the other main language that's spoken in South America is? Yeah, Portuguese. Yeah, Brazil speaks Portuguese. Good. Now, that's not to say they don't speak other languages there. English, of course, is another one, as is French and Dutch. But those kind of big ones. Actually, interesting enough, so is Japanese. Brazil has the highest Japanese population in the world outside of Japan. Yeah. 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 Now, one of the tricks to writing good notes, I talked to you guys about how I was going to do that, is pulling out information that's necessary and leaving information that isn't. So one of the things I'm going to tell you right now is a piece of advice that you've probably been told your entire academic career and is totally wrong, and you should just throw that right out the window. Have you guys ever heard someone tell you, well, if the teacher writes it down, you should write it down too? It goes on the board. Here's the thing with that. That's totally wrong. And here's why. That logic goes way back in the days of chalkboards, where when a teacher would give you notes, they would physically write it on the board. So it makes sense that, if they write it, you write it. Because, let's face it, a teacher's not going to write like 15 times faster than you are. You're going to be able to keep pace with them, no problem. Here's the issue with that. Am I writing anything down? No, it's all PowerPoint. I typed this out years ago. So you're kind of doomed if you try to write literally every word I wrote down and try to stay on top of it. Because I can flip through slides all day. You have no prayers staying on top. There's just no way. In fact, it's gotten so bad in some colleges that college professors will actually sell their notes so that you don't actually have to write anything down. So that's a bad piece of advice. What should be is write the intent of whatever the teacher writes down. So what's the important part? So look at the first sentence. Latin America gets its name from the settlement of European cultures that the Spain and Portuguese languages are based off of Latin. So what's the whole point of that sentence? What are we trying to say here? Yeah. Yeah. So let me show you a really, really fast way of writing that same thing down. And I'm sorry if you're using a device. This doesn't work as well for you, but you know what? You can take pictures of it, so I'm not too worried about it. People do that all the time. That being said, you still have to limit the information to make sense whenever you memorize it, but yeah, here we go. Right. So the whole abject point of this sentence, as you said, is that Latin America's name comes from Latin-speaking countries. Arrow implies relationship. Latin America, Latin-speaking countries such as Spain and Portugal. That means the same thing, only count the number of words I wrote here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And we could throw in 9 if we're really being finicky, saying arrow and ID is a word. As opposed to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. We've more than cut it in half. And we can keep doing that as we go through. So this is one of the things that you can think about as we go about writing notes, so that you're not literally having to type down every single type of thing. The other thing to this, too, is that you can take your time with this, because if I just skip, something like if I'm like, right, I know this slide, move on, you can go back and get the YouTube video to catch whatever you missed. All right. So how big is Latin America? About 8 million square miles, or 16% of the world's landmass. Think about what I just said. A little less than 20%. In other words, a little less than 1/5 of all of the Earth is Latin America. It's a fairly largish place, but it's still a lot smaller than somewhere like Asia. As I said, there's a lot of different cultures. One thing that's actually unique about Latin America is there's a lot of cultural blending that occurred. And it actually goes way back to the original settlement of this area. Culturally speaking, when the conquistadors went from Spain to the New World and were settling these areas and conquering these big empires and establishing colonies, there's a huge percentage of white men in these colonies. The ratio of white men to white women was something in the neighborhood of 1,000 white men for every one white woman. And so a lot of these guys settled down and married first Native Americans and then Africans as they were brought over the transatlantic slave trade. So there's actually a cultural mixing and blending that occurs there, and the development of mixed cultures for toy, which includes like Creole culture, as well as a lot of what we see in terms of what we consider like Latin American culture, which lack of a better description there. Because again, Latin America is a big place with a lot of different cultures. But it's interesting because there's some of these blendings that occur that don't really occur anywhere else. We'll get more of that later. As far as physically concerned, one of the largest, technically the largest land area, the largest feature in South America is the Amazon basin, because it's basically the entire continent, or at least the vast majority of it. It's pretty much all this area right in here. And we have, and of course, the Amazon River and all this fun stuff, as well as the Orinoco and the Paraná. The other major one are the Andes, which are in the west coast of South America. These giant mountain ranges that go in excess of 17,000 feet. 1,700, I think it's 7,000. So it's pretty high. And what's interesting is, again, you look historically, the peoples that lived in modern-day Peru, the Inca, settled in this area. They developed these large cities like Machu Picchu that were in these really high elevations, and it's just kind of a really neat kind of adaptation to that. But another thing that's kind of neat about that is that this shows the Pacific Ring of Fire. Again, how we talked about it earlier, because if you look at the Andes and how they stretch this area, they actually connect to the various mountains throughout Central America into the Rockies all the way up through Canada. So this is almost like one giant mountain range. I mean, they're disconnected, but they do sort of exist. And another thing that's interesting is how the land is formed through tectonic activity. Are you familiar with the term cordilleras? Okay, basically imagine a bunch of mountain ranges parallel to each other. Okay, that's the thing that causes from this folding that occurs as the land moves itself. So there's a lot kind of going on this western coast, but that has effects on the inner area as well. Have we talked about the rain shadow effect? Okay. If you look at mountain ranges, often what you will see is on one side, facing the ocean, you have this really green, verdant area where lots of plant life grows. So imagine like a mountain. Right? We've got a little snow on it. Maybe like a little goat. Right? She knows what's up. This area gets lots of rain, it's very nice. But then this side is a desert. There's nothing there. They will put cactus. Totally what they would want to put like. Right? Oh, man. Hey, yeah, look at them needles. This guy's like, I'm dangerous, but I got feelings. What? I know, right? So why does this happen? Well, basically what happens is as moisture comes from the ocean, as these winds blow in from the ocean, we bring this moisture, and as it goes onto the mountain, it condenses. And so basically, if you can imagine like a little cloud bumping into a mountain and dropping all this rainwater, right? And as it raises in elevation because it's losing weight, it's going to keep rising until eventually it gets over the mountain but has no more moisture in it. So essentially, this mountain range is like a physical barrier to moisture. So one side gets all of it, the other does not. So it's like casting a shadow, rain shadow effect. You can see this in the Andes, with the Atacama Desert being on the other side. How dry is it there? It is the driest place on Earth. Nothing lives there, not even bacteria. Nothing can live there. Yeah.
Okay, so right travel fit, is that?
That's what that is, yeah.
So there's no cactus here?
Well, that's not the economic, no. In truth. Yeah, my picture is not real to scale. I know that shocks you all. So, but that gives you an idea of how that works. Now, here's another thing that's kind of interesting. You guys know I was talking to you about organizing your notes? Good, you remember this? This is another way of organizing your notes. Now you'll notice that first one I had big sentences, yeah? That's not very easy to write down, is it? Nor is it particularly well organized. This is something you can use to organize better thoughts. So the rest of it looks like this. I did that on purpose. I want you to see something very, very clear. Can you get more or less the idea of what I'm about to talk about from this slide? Yeah, more or less. I mean, you're not going to maybe get all the specific names, people, places, and things, but here's the beauty of this. You can add that in as we're going along. So the good thing I say, like, this is a learning feature, you can write right next to it, right? But this also cuts way, 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 way back on the number of words you have to write. And thus, we get to one of the more important points when it comes to organizing your information, is cut out unnecessary words, use organizers whenever possible, and put it in a sensible organizational skill tree. Stuff like this will help you to cut back on a lot of stuff. Because to be perfectly honest, making PowerPoints are a skill. Making good PowerPoints are a skill. One of the things you're going to learn in technology is how to design PowerPoints. And one of the big no-nos is putting too many words. You guys are familiar with the expression, too long did not read? Yeah, that's kind of the reality of PowerPoints. And the simple fact is, not all teachers are very good at making PowerPoints. That's because, I can tell you this right now, at no point in teacher school they tell you how to do PowerPoints. Yeah, right? You just have to kind of figure it out. And so what happens is teachers tend to throw more information than is necessary, something that you can't possibly follow along on, yes? It's like I was talking about a second ago. So you've got to be able to cut the crap down into something manageable and stay afloat. Otherwise, you'll be very, very sad. So, no, you dropped it all right away. So let's get back to diversity of land. First and foremost, plains. Plains and flatlands. One of the things you realize about South America is there's quite a few of those, specifically in the way south. Right, Argentina. These things like the Cerrado, which is in the central part of Brazil. These are areas that are very good for ranching. And so there's still a cowboy culture that exists in South America. Bull riding is a national pastime. In fact, a huge percentage of the world's beef comes from South America because of it. Mountains, of course, we've talked about the Andes, plus the Sierra Madre and Occidental Oriental of Mexico. But the vast majority of this area is tropic in nature. The vast majority of Latin America is tropical or even subtropical. Basically, you guys know what tropics means? It grows between, or rather, I should say, it exists between the tropics of Cancer and Capricorn. You know what that means?
No.
Okay, let's talk about the sun. Beautiful sun. Hey, where does all of Earth's energy come from? Right? And if you imagine like the sun as being like a giant flashlight out in space, pointing at the Earth, right? We are constantly spinning around it, yeah? Okay. So at some point, at any time, the Earth is getting direct sunlight. You know, where it's hottest. You're getting most of the sunlight, the most direct sunlight, right? And if you actually were to look at the way that the light shines on the Earth, as the Earth moves around, that central point of light moves north and south, like so, as it goes through the various seasons. But at no point does it ever pass the tropics of Cancer or the Tropic of Capricorn. So basically, everything between those two imaginary lines is getting direct sunlight year-round. So for that reason, tropical climates don't have 4 seasons, they have 2. And they're not like we think of like spring, fall, all that fun stuff. It's the wet season and the dry season. How many guys are still doing Lion King? Right? So that whole part at the beginning of the movie where it's circle right, and everything's like amazing, they're singing that, right? I believe wholeheartedly they're trying to fool you at the beginning because you're just kind of like, okay, it starts screaming. Oh my God! Sweet monkey Jesus. That was the idea. Well, anyway. So this area. I don't know that happened. You're recording it, right? Of course it happened.
He's recording.
Okay. So, you go back and scare you 1,000 times a day. I'm going to say that as my alarm. All out of bed every morning. Did you see that alarm clock that has a little helicopter? It's for really stubborn people who don't want to get out of bed. As soon as your alarm goes off, it launches the helicopter and it goes flying around the room and you have to go catch it. And your alarm won't shut off until you catch it. The worst one though, it's kind of like that, is it had like all these like Tetris piece type things, like 5 of them, and it explodes out of the top of the thing, so like shoots them out, and you have to arrange them back in the right place before it shuts up. It's like easy, Satan. Anyways, back to Lion King. So, you know the scene how at the beginning everything's great, everything's all happy, you know, all that sort of stuff, there's plenty of food, everything like that, and as the movie goes on, it gets worse and worse and worse, it starts with terrorist games, and everything's dying, and it's all, you know, bad, it's all dry, there's nothing there, and there's no life, and then Simba roars and all the rain starts, and starts washing away every bad thing, and everything's right again, right? Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about that. That's the wet and the dry season. In the dry season, nothing lives. It's really, really dry. In the wet seasons where everything's blooming and going crazy.
So Lion King was filmed during the dry season because the cows couldn't talk.
The Lion King was a documentary and it was filmed in real time.
What?
Right.
The thing was dry season.
Sorry, I know what you were saying. Yeah, right. It was well, it's sort of all of it. In fact, that's one of the some of the symbolism in the Lion King movie. Because it's the literal circle of life. The literal circle of life is the cycle of death and rebirth. And we often use that as an allegory for seasons. I mean, in fact, we're about to go into the season of death, which is winter. And if you think about it, like the kind of beginning starts like the end of fall, kind of beginning of winter, being that we celebrate this sort of almost macabre appreciation and interest in death, which is Halloween. Nice. But if you think about it, Halloween is all about like the macabre and all that stuff. We actually talked about it quite a bit when we get to Europe because Halloween's an interesting holiday. It actually comes from a couple different cultures, and ultimately it's about threatening people. Because what happened was in the turn of the century, well, actually kind of a little before that now, kind of late part of the 19th century, you have a group of like random kids hanging around. who would basically get in trouble breaking windows and stuff like that and causing pranks, and causing a lot of property damage. And so what happened is that people who wanted to keep their property safe would bribe the kids to go away. And they'd do it with candy. Like, here's a bunch of candy, now leave me alone. And so the kids would, they got smart with this, and so they basically went to people's houses and said, either you give me something like candy or something I want, or I'm going to mess up your house. Trick or treat. Yeah, well, the whole expression, yeah. But even just trick or treat, think about it, trick or treat. I'm going to pull prank on you or give me something. It's basically blackmailing people. Which makes me laugh, right? I love it whenever you have like these little tiny kids who are like really shy, like full fist in the mouth, and the parents say, "I'll mess you up, fool." I don't think that this is, I don't know about this. I'm gonna break your legs. Like donkey and training gun. So, as far as natural resources are concerned, we kind of talked about a few of these already, but as far as minerals are concerned, gold and silver are kind of the ones that have been a big part of their culture for centuries. That's kind of why the conquistadors came in the first place. It's all that delicious gold would pile inside their bellies and carry them down the country. That's what we do. Here's the thing about this, though. What is money made out of for much of history? Gold. Well, she's not wrong. What's interesting, because here, let's talk about money for a second. Money's funny. Money's a funny thing, right? Let's talk about it for a second. Why does money have value? Like, why do we say, I don't know, be able to buy this stuff? Why don't we say, nah, it's just paper, I don't want it?
Why do we buy it?
It's not actually. I want you to hear people say it because that's what my dad like insisted for years. I'm like, we've been off the gold standard for like over 30 years. It's a self-perpetuating myth, right? It's not actually true though. We went off the gold standard. We stopped basing it on gold. It's based upon a lot of other more complicated stuff. But essentially, it boils down to this: it's a whole big game of make-believe. Money only has value because we say it does. For instance, it would be a weird thing to think about the possibility of you going to a store with your nice big stack of cash and you're like, I would like the thing. And the store going, nah, you can't buy the thing because I don't like what you have. I'm not going to take that. That's worthless to me.
So like for real, we could like say a $5 bill is like
worthless.
$500.
Well, you could, but everyone else would have to agree with you.
So we could just change it.
Yes.
$5.
But here's the thing. Why don't we do that?
Because then we get too greedy.
Yep.
We're cheap.
Yep.
It'll go away.
Yep.
Scarcism, whatever it's called.
You're on the right way. Scarcity. Scarcity is the thing you're thinking about. Scarcity determines value. So if we suddenly say, like, it's worth all the money, it's thousands of dollars, things like that, then there's so much money now in circulation, so much value in circulation specifically, that it becomes worth less.
So like the big houses, that's why they're worth so much because we don't have, our land is starting to get scarce.
Not really, no. The reason that they're that expensive is essentially what people are wanting to pay for. Because if you think about it, the size of your house isn't the only factor to determine how expensive it is. Like, for instance, you go watch those shows like House Hunters International, they'll have like a house that's the size of this room, and they're like, well, you can see the beach is right over there. It's like right off in the Caribbean, things like that. It's like this little tiny house. Like, how much is this? Well, it's about $1.5 million. They're like, that's a really good deal. It's like, are you insane? But because so many people want to live on the beach, that price goes up. Because the other factor that contributes to price is demand.
That's like
Because there are certain things that there's not very much of, but people aren't willing to buy. If I sit there and pick lint out of my belly button and be like, millions of dollars, no one's going to buy it, right? Unless there's a really big weirdo somewhere. But, there's not a lot of demand for that. Yeah.
that's like yesterday. When we started buying donuts, it first was 50 cents. But then the lady was like, now it's $1 because everybody wants to buy it.
And there you are. So that's the interaction of supply and demand, yeah? So the same thing applies to money now. Here's the thing is, there is a thing called intrinsic value. Intrinsic value means that it has value outside of what the saying does. So for instance, gold, most people will accept it that it has intrinsic value. Oh, I thought it was a texture. I say, oh, look at that. Skills. What? But intrinsic value, guys, if you have something with lots of intrinsic value, that can be very useful to you in certain circumstances if money falls apart, i.e. the Great Depression. You see, what happened is money lost a ton of value in a really short period of time. That's called hyperinflation. And so people who lived on farms and stuff like that and just kind of grew everything and sold their leftovers, they were hit less hard if they owned their land. If they weren't having to pay, rent on it or something like that, they were fine. And that's what happened to my grandparents. I mean, it meant that they couldn't really buy much because people couldn't really afford all this stuff, and so money was really tight. But otherwise, these vegetables they were growing still had intrinsic value. They could still eat them, yeah? So that was kind of how things work in terms of intrinsic value versus other thing. Gold is funny like that because it does have intrinsic value. Mostly because everybody recognizes that those things, but when you really get down to it, it's just a very shiny metal. Now it's good for a lot of things. There's a lot of cool stuff you can do with gold. But ultimately, almost everything we think of that has like value, like gems and things like that, they're really just really shiny rocks. The only reason that people are willing to give so much money for them is because there's this whole interaction of supply and demand. Think about diamonds, for instance. Diamonds used to be incredibly cheap. Because they're actually not particularly scarce, they're all over the place.
Yeah, that's like roses. They're cheap now, but they're Valentine's Day, they're like $12.
Right, because they scarce. Oh, you know that. A dozen roses will run you about $50, $60. Huh? Well, or just not. Yeah. Well, I think we always thought it was funny is if you give them like a plant that actually grows, like that has some value. But back to diamonds, guys. What's funny about diamonds is around the turn of the 20th century, a company called De Beers essentially started running a bunch of advertisements saying this is a symbol of love. And the only real love, the only real relationships are started with diamonds. So basically people started flying diamonds to give us relationships, specifically as an engagement ring. And now we have this multi-billion dollar diamond. In the turn-in folder, if you please. Wow, wow.